You know, in Genesis, we learned that God said that it wasn't good for Adam to be alone, so he created Eve to be a companion. In 1 Samuel, we read about the strong bond between David and Jonathan. And in John 11:35, we read that Jesus wept over the loss of his friend Lazarus. You know, relationships are the element which makes us human. It's part of the human experience. And they're vitally important. And they're not just important in our day-to-day lives, but they're also vitally important for us as leaders. Hello, I'm Master Sergeant Bland, and you know, between serving in the Marine Corps and in the United States Air Force, I have a collective of nearly 15 years of leadership experience. And the one thing that I have found over that time is that the vital element to effective leadership is the relationships that we build with those people that we lead on a day-to-day basis. You know, it's important to note that relationships are important because we operate in today's organizations in a global environment. And this means that all of our organizations, whether it's the military or elsewhere, are required to change rapidly. Unfortunately, research shows us that 66% of change initiatives oftentimes fail, and that failure is directly related to ineffective leadership. So today I'd like to take just a few moments to briefly discuss what I think are 5 specific areas that people can look at in creating a stronger relationships in their leadership style to curb that ineffective leadership within those organizations. So we'll go ahead and we will address essentially the nature of leadership. We'll look at the difference between leadership and management. We'll also examine what it means to be an effective leader or some hallmarks of effective leadership. We'll also discuss embracing the leader-follower relationships. And last but certainly not least, how communication plays into all of these things. So let's go ahead and get started by looking at what the nature of leadership is. You know, the nature of leadership is something that's oftentimes misunderstood, and that's predominantly because there's multiple definitions that are out there. And oftentimes people look at it or misunderstand what leadership truly is. You know, some people argue that leadership is an art, while other people argue that it's a science. From an art perspective, it's that it's just a natural talent that people are born with. And this is true. God has certainly gifted certain people with the talent of leadership. But on the other hand, there is a certain aspect of the scientific view that is also accurate in the sense that a person who realizes they may not be the best leader can go out there and they can study the leadership theories and principles that currently exist. They can talk to other people, they can watch other leaders, and they can essentially learn to be an effective leader. So in that essence, I'd like to argue that leadership is both art and science, in the sense that, yes, there's a certain degree of raw talent that is to it, but there is also this holistic aspect of it in which we take the time to learn how to be more effective leaders. More importantly is to understand that while there are multiple definitions of leadership, none of them are better than any of the other ones. There isn't one definition that is more defining than the others. But for the purpose of today's discussion, I'd like to go ahead and define leadership for you, the viewer, as merely the process of influencing others towards a common goal or objective. Now that we understand the nature of leadership, let's go ahead and move on towards one of my areas of interest, which is looking at the difference between leadership and management. And I think that this is vitally important because I think oftentimes people think that they're being good leaders when they're really managing. So I think that as far as from a leadership perspective, we need to understand what it is. So let's kind of define leadership just a little bit more. As I stated, leadership is a process of influencing others towards a common goal. All right. This essentially means that as a leader within an organization, or organizational leadership is about setting the climate of the organization. It's about implementing what that vision, what that direction is, and then influencing those followers within the organization to move towards that vision or direction. All right. You're responsible for establishing what the morale is and so forth. On the other aspect of it is also understanding that leadership is the social influence, essentially of moving people towards that common objective. But understanding that it's the social influence means that when those people move towards that, they're doing so voluntarily, and that's vitally important. And this is where we see the main difference. Whereas a leader is influencing someone, a manager is a person who is responsible for controlling the organization's resources. This includes their human resources as well as all other aspects that go into creating a product. And that right there is the end result. The manager is concerned about creating the product. They are not concerned about the resource that is used to create the product, just the product itself. They're worried about that benchmark and they're worried about efficiency. And they maintain both through strict control of their resources. So now we've looked at the difference between leadership and management, let's move on to defining or looking at what is an effective leader. Now, as we already stated, leadership is not an easy process. It's something that comes over time. It's something that's learned. But we need to understand that as leaders, there comes a great deal of responsibility. But even above responsibility is expectation. And I'm not talking about the expectation of the organization. Instead, what I'm talking about is the expectation our followers have of us. Those people who are trusting us to lead them to that end goal. And so we need to understand that there is a great deal of expectation. You also need to understand that just because you hold a leadership position doesn't automatically make you a good leader. And so that's the difference between that positional power versus that reverent power. And as an effective leader, we should be moving towards reverent power over our positional power. We also need to understand that our effective leadership is measured by those who follow us. And they make that measurement by our behavior, essentially how we act towards them. And becomes vital because effective leadership is about knowing the people that you're leading. It's about understanding that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all leadership style. Instead, it's about adapting our leadership style to the personal needs of the people that we're leading, to our followers. Alright, so we've kind of looked at what effective leadership is. Let's also then move towards how do we make effective leadership, or how do we become effective leaders. And I would argue that that is done by establishing that leader-follower relationship. This is where you take the opportunity to get to know the individuals that you're leading. This is how you begin to build that foundation upon which your effective leadership success is built upon. Alright, so we also need to understand that the importance of the leader-follower relationship is because we operate in a diverse organization. When I talk about diversity, I'm not necessarily talking about cultural diversity, although that is an important aspect of organizational leadership. What I'm talking about is the diversity of persons, and this is the sense that no single individual is exactly the same as another individual. We all bring to the table a different set of values, a different set of needs, and our own personalities. And so as such, a leader has the job of being able to adapt their leadership style to those different personalities and being able to know who the person is. By knowing who your person is, you're able to identify what their needs are. And by being able to identify their needs, that means that you as a leader are capable of meeting those needs. And that is where that person is going to determine your behavior and or essentially give you the grade in effectiveness, because that's how you are acting towards them in the sense that you have met their needs. Now, the key ingredient to all of this, I mean, it's great to say I want to know my people, but how do we go about getting to know our people? And so I would like to say that knowing our people is vital, but that's only done through the process of communication. So communication is, in essence, the cornerstone around what effective leadership needs to be built around. Because you can't create, a relationship just doesn't happen overnight. It requires communication. So we define communication merely as the process of sharing. Now this is the process of sharing our needs, the process of sharing our ideas and our stories. And this is what I'd like to implement also, is that you really need to know your people's stories. Because the organization story is built on the individual stories. Understanding that story, understanding where that person comes from, understanding their successes and failures is going to enable you to be a more effective leader at the end of the day. Also need to understand that effective communication is a two-way highway. What I'm talking about here is fighting for that feedback, and that's only accomplished when we as leaders take the time to listen. You know, and this is the important aspect for all of us as leaders to recognize, is that listening allows us to show or to demonstrate to those that are following us that we truly value them as an individual. We truly care about what they think, what they need, and where they're coming from. So now that we've talked about essentially what communication is, understanding it's the hallmark and the cornerstone to our effective leadership piece, it's the foundation upon which our leader-follower relationships are built upon, I'd like to just go ahead and wrap things up. So I've given you 5 steps, things that we've talked about very briefly on a very expansive topic. Essentially the nature of leadership, understanding the difference between leadership and management, embracing the leader-follower relationship, knowing what effective leadership is, and understanding that there is no one-size-fits-all, and that it's important for us to know our people, and then knowing that those relationships and knowing our people are built on the process of communication. In closing, I'd like to say, you know, again, leadership isn't an easy process. I've been at it for over 14 years, and I still don't have complete control over it. I'm much better than I was the day that I started, but I'm certainly nowhere there yet. At the end of the day, though, it's important to understand that as a leader, we're interacting with people. We're interacting with individuals who have needs, who have their own story, like we mentioned before, and who also want to be valued as an individual. When we take the time to know those individual stories, when we take the time to listen to our people, we are showing them that we care about who they are as an individual. And that is where we begin as leaders to become effective, because that is where we begin to earn their respect. And in earning their respect, we earn their willingness to follow us towards that common goal or that objective. You know, God has given us many, many, many talents. And for some of us, that's leadership. And so I just ask that you would remember that it is truly a precious gift, that you use it for good, and more importantly, that you use it for His glory and for His kingdom. Thank you for taking the time to share leadership ideas with me today, and I hope that you enjoyed this, and I just wish to send you out with God's many blessings. Thank you.